Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and the Feathered Clue. Chapter 1. A sip before the truth. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting a mellow glow across the polished floorboards of the sitting room. Outside, a light drizzle whispered against the window panes, and far off, the bell of a tram rang out, a soft reminder that they were still in the heart of London. At the room's centre stood a small round table laid for two. Two fine china cups sat upon it, delicate wisps of steam curling upward. Hercule Poirot, dressed with his usual precision in a grey three-piece suit, sat with his fingers steepled, his eyes following the steam as if it carried unspoken questions. Across from him, Captain Hastings, a little less formal, but no less alert, reached for his cup. "It's quite hot," Hastings remarked, lifting the cup toward his lips. "Eh bien, mon ami," said Poirot, his gaze unmoving. "Do not be hasty. Some enjoy their coffee scalding, a test of nerves, perhaps. Others," he gestured toward his own untouched cup, "prefer patience." Hastings grinned and set the cup down. "So you'd rather we drink together?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is a small courtesy. Even coffee, it is improved by company." For a time, silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Poirot's eyes remained on the dancing steam, while Hastings studied his friend with familiar curiosity. Poirot seldom spoke without intention, even when the subject was something as simple as a cup of coffee. "Poirot," Hastings said at last, shifting in his chair, "I've always admired your way with a mystery. You see what others miss. But tell me honestly, have you ever been truly stumped?" Poirot didn't reply immediately. He picked up a silver spoon and stirred his coffee gently, though he made no move to drink. Something flickered behind his eyes. Memory, perhaps, or regret. "Stumped," he echoed. "Ah, my friend, even the most refined engine can sputter, even these little grey cells," he tapped his temple lightly, "can falter." "There was a case then?" Hastings leaned forward. "One you couldn't solve?" Poirot gave a slow nod. "Yes, a most unusual one. The facts were all there, lying in wait, but my mind it would not see the shape they formed. I missed the heart of it." "But you solved it eventually," Hastings said. "You must have." Poirot smiled faintly. "Not alone. I had assistance." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You? Help?" "Do not look so astonished," Poirot said with a glint of humour. "Even I must occasionally accept help. Rarely, but it happens." "I must hear this," Hastings said eagerly. "Who helped the great Hercule Poirot?" Poirot chuckled softly. "You are too kind, mon ami. But very well, I will tell you. It is not a story I often share, not out of shame, but because it is delicate." At last, he raised his cup and took a long sip. The coffee had cooled just right. "Ah," he said, eyes momentarily closed in satisfaction. "Now we may begin." Chapter 2. The Silent Witness. "The year was 1930, Poirot began, setting his teacup down with a delicate clink. "A fog-laced February morning, if memory serves, the sort where the sky presses low and grey, and the city seems to hold its breath." Hastings leaned forward, elbows on his knees, utterly engrossed. "The victim," Poirot continued, fingers drumming the armrest, "was Margaret Cavendish, recently widowed, once a generous patron of charities, and independently wealthy. She lived alone in a grand old Kensington home, stone arches, oil portraits in heavy frames, staircases that creaked like they had something to say. The inspector, Chief Inspector Barrow, was a decent fellow, though not imaginative. He rang me himself. "Poirot," he said, "you'll want to see this one." I arrived within the hour. "What did you find?" Hastings asked. Poirot's gaze was intent. A locked room mystery, but without the lock. Barrow met me at the door, pale as the morning fog. "No forced entry," he said. "Nothing stolen, no signs of a struggle." He took me straight to the drawing room. Poirot paused, revisiting the memory. "She was laid out on a Persian rug," he said softly, as though carefully placed. But the knife in her chest told a crueler story. A slender blade, surgical, almost, driven through the sternum. Instant death. No fingerprints on the weapon. None on the doorknob. "Gloves?" Hastings guessed. Poirot nodded. "Undoubtedly. Whoever did it was meticulous. The room was untouched. No broken glass, no disturbed furniture, nothing missing. It was the maid, Laura, who discovered the body. Just past 8 o'clock. And she called the police at once. Immediately. She screamed, the household stirred, and the inspector was summoned. Laura insisted nothing seemed amiss, aside from Madame Cavendish lying dead." Poirot lifted his cup, then paused without drinking. "I asked to speak with the other members of the house. There were 3, Annie Cavendish, the victim's younger sister, Laura, the maid, and Oliver, her nephew, visiting during his university holiday, a quiet, pale young man." "Did anyone hear anything?" Hastings asked. Poirot raised a brow. "And here we reach the curious part. No one heard a cry, a thud, nothing at all. Yet in that quiet room, I noticed something Barrow had missed." "A clue?" Hastings leaned in. "Of a kind," said Poirot. "In the far corner, beside the French windows, stood a tall brass cage. Inside it, a parrot." "A parrot?" Hastings repeated, blinking. Poirot nodded. "A striking bird, green and yellow, sharp-eyed, but it was trembling. Its feathers were fluffed with fear, and it was silent, utterly still. I approached and spoke softly. It turned its head away." Poirot's voice grew reflective. "That was not mere fright, it was distress. I've seen that behavior before, not just in birds, but in people. It had witnessed something terrible." "But surely," Hastings began. Poirot raised a finger. "Ah! Do not underestimate such a creature. Laura told me Madame Cavendish adored the bird, spoke to it constantly. It even mimicked her laugh. It was not mere decoration, it was a companion." "So it saw the killer?" "That, I suspected. But there was more. I examined the cage. The top hatch was slightly ajar, not unlatched, but open just enough to suggest recent use. And on the edge, something sticky." "Sticky?" Hastings frowned. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Honey? Or perhaps jam? Birds are drawn to sweets. Someone had tried to coax the parrot, to distract it, or silence it." "Couldn't the maid have been feeding it?" Hastings asked. Poirot shook his head. "Laura was firm. Madame Cavendish fed the parrot herself, always, even when unwell." He turned back to Hastings, his tone sharpening. "One final detail. Near the cage sat a small bowl, fruit, seeds, and beside it a single button." "A button? Flat, pearl-coloured, unusual, too large for a lady's dress, not from any uniform in the house. I pocketed it immediately." "And what did all this tell you?" Hastings asked, voice hushed. Poirot smiled faintly. "That, mon ami, is the heart of the tale. This was no crime of passion, not of greed. It was a crime of silence and of misplaced loyalty." He sipped his now cold coffee and set the cup down gently. "And it was the parrot," he said, "who held the key." Chapter 3. Echoes behind a closed door. "The first person I interviewed, naturellement," Poirot began, lightly tapping the rim of his coffee cup, "was young Oliver." He gave a thoughtful nod, eyes distant as he summoned the memory. He entered the parlour quietly, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his coat. He looked like someone who hadn't slept, not from sorrow perhaps, but from the unease that follows sudden upheaval. His shirt was crisply pressed, but his hair was dishevelled. A contradiction, no? Hastings tilted his head. "Did he seem nervous?" Not at first, Poirot said. He was courteous, composed, sat where I asked, answered willingly, but it was too controlled, like a performance practiced in front of a mirror. I was in my room, he told me, reading. I watched his eyes as he said it. No flickers, no twitching hands. Perfectly steady, but too steady. It was the sort of calm that felt borrowed, ill-fitting. I see, I said. And what is your profession, monsieur? Are you employed? He straightened slightly. I own a garments factory, men's shirts, wholesale. Indeed? And how fares business in such times? Quite well, he replied. New clients, steady demand. Fortunate then, I said mildly. I've read that many factories are closing, crippled by new tariffs, import restrictions. Some say nearly 70% have shuttered. You've not encountered such problems? There it was, Hastings, just a flicker. He hesitated, ever so slightly, like a man who misses a step on the stairs. No, he said, adjusting his collar. Must be other regions, I suppose. Perhaps, I answered, but I made a note. A man running a factory knows such matters intimately. To pretend ignorance? Very curious. I let it pass and changed tack. Did you hear anything this morning? A cry? A disturbance? No, he said quickly, too quickly. Not even footsteps? Nothing. I was deep in my book. And your door, open or closed? Closed. And yet it is an old house, creaking floors, thin walls, sound travels. He shifted uncomfortably. I suppose I just didn't notice anything. Très bien, I said. I smiled, but I had heard what I needed. Hastings furrowed his brow. But why would he lie about that? What's the harm in hearing a noise? Ah, said Poirot, exactly what I asked myself. If a man truly hears nothing, there's no shame. But when he insists too much on silence, it often means he is trying to erase a sound he did hear. A scream, Hastings guessed. Or a name, Poirot said. Or a voice he recognized, a phrase that gave someone away. If he heard the victim call out, or the killer speak, he would have to explain. Better to claim nothing at all. Hastings nodded slowly, absorbing the idea. And the business about the tariffs, you baited him. Just so, Poirot replied. The truth is often revealed not in the answer, but in the reaction. A man who runs a factory does not fail to notice crushing economic policies. If he lies about that, either he doesn't own the business, or it is not thriving as he claimed. So possibly a motive, Hastings asked. Poirot gave a slow nod. Possibly. Desperation is a powerful force. Madame Cavendish, by all accounts, was not especially generous to family. She didn't support him. She gave him a roof, little else. Laura once overheard her say Oliver had no stomach for risk. Hastings chuckled. Bit harsh. Words, Hastings, Poirot said gently, can wound as deeply as knives. He paused, then added, and yet I must say Oliver did not strike me as dangerous. Evasive, yes, but not cruel. I believe he's hiding something, but perhaps not murder. Then why the lies? Poirot lifted a finger. There is more than one kind of lie. Some conceal guilt. Some protect others. And some are worn like armor, to defend wounded pride. We do not yet know which kind his is. A soft silence settled between them, broken only by the steady ticking of the mantel clock. Then Hastings asked, "What did you do next?" Poirot folded his hands. "Next I asked to see the sister. Annie? Oui, mon ami," and her story was stranger still. Chapter 4. A Cry in the Quiet. Poirot leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, as if following the footsteps of memory. "After Oliver," he said softly, "I asked to speak with the sister, Annie Cavendish." He turned to Hastings with a pensive look. A reserved woman? Plain in appearance, grey hair, neatly pinned, hands faintly trembling in her lap. But her eyes, Hastings, those were not the eyes of someone fragile. They were watchful, alert, even through her grief. She took her seat across from me in the drawing room without hesitation. No weeping, no protest, just a silence that felt practiced, like a woman long accustomed to being overlooked. "You are Madame Cavendish's sister?" I asked. "Yes, my name is Annie. I've lived with Margaret for 20 years. "And this morning?" I asked gently. "What did you see? What did you hear?" She looked at her hands as she answered. "We had dinner around 7, nothing out of the ordinary. Afterward, I went to the sitting room. Margaret went upstairs. About 10 minutes later, I heard her scream. And then? I called for Laura, our maid. I told her to check. She went, came back quickly, and said my sister was dead. I told her to call the police." Poirot paused, glancing at Hastings. Her words were flat, almost rehearsed, no trembling voice, no visible sorrow, just formality, calm and composed. Hastings raised a brow. "You'd expect more emotion after such a shock." "Indeed," said Poirot, "but grief wears many masks. It was not her composure that concerned me, it was the timing." "Timing?" Hastings asked. Poirot raised a finger. "Annie said the scream came 10 minutes after dinner, but Laura, when I questioned her, said 5. He rose and walked slowly across the rug. "I called Laura in next. She arrived quickly, still in her apron, hands folded neatly. A quiet girl, serious. She had the look of someone not often asked her opinion. I let her speak freely. "You discovered Madame Cavendish's body?" I asked. "Yes, sir. I heard a scream. Miss Annie called me, told me to go check. I went upstairs." "And what did you find?" "She was on the floor. I didn't go too close. I ran back, told Miss Annie, and called the police." "How long after dinner was the scream?" "Oh, 5 minutes, maybe." Poirot turned back to Hastings. "Do you see, mon ami?" Hastings nodded slowly. "The times don't match." "Exactly. Not a large gap, but in a murder, 5 minutes is everything." More telling still was how aligned their accounts were. Identical phrasing, same order of events. Not natural, not spontaneous. "Too consistent," Hastings said. In grief people rarely tell the same story the same way. Details blur. But their stories fit together like puzzle pieces, deliberately so." "So, you suspected they were hiding something?" "I suspected they were being careful," Poirot replied. "That's not guilt. It's caution. There's a difference." He folded his hands again. "And yet I found no evidence, no fingerprints, no disturbance, no missing items. The scene was undisturbed, just as Laura claimed." Hastings was quiet for a moment. "Then what were they hiding?" Poirot smiled faintly. "That was the riddle, not in what they told me, but in what they left unsaid." "They both agreed on the scream," Hastings noted. "Exactly," Poirot said. "Which told me something important. They were close enough to hear it clearly. Annie was not tucked away in another room, nor was Laura far from the stairs. They were nearby." He leaned forward. "And that raised a question. Who was the scream meant for?" Hastings blinked. "You think she screamed on purpose?" "I think it was no involuntary gasp of terror. It was a loud, conscious cry, a call for help, which suggests Madame Cavendish saw her attacker before the blade fell." Poirot stood once more. "She had a moment, a second, to react. That means the killer didn't strike from behind. She saw them. She recognized them. She screamed because she knew who it was." Hastings stared at him. "So the scream is the only honest moment in the entire crime?" "Exactly," Poirot said. "No fingerprints, no confessions, but the scream told a truth. Someone was close enough to hear it, and someone wanted to make sure no more truths followed." He turned back toward Hastings, eyes sharp as glass. "I had no physical evidence, no blood trail, no stray thread, but I had questions, doubt, and a parrot who still refused to meet my gaze." Chapter 5. The Garden Illusion. Poirot folded his hands and looked squarely at Hastings. "Sometimes, mon ami," he said softly, "the question is not what you discover, but why it was placed for you to discover at all." He let the words linger, then continued. "After speaking with Annie and Laura, I returned to Madame Cavendish's bedroom. Something about that room had stayed with me, a discomfort I couldn't quite explain. It was too neat. too controlled. Murder leaves a trace, even if subtle. And yet that space was pristine. Poirot described the room slowly, as if reconstructing it before his eyes. I moved deliberately. The furniture remained untouched. The only footprints were those of the police. But near the fireplace, partially hidden beneath an embroidered cushion on the armchair, I found something unexpected. He raised an eyebrow. A letter, unsealed, folded once. The handwriting, neat but unremarkable, just 6 words. The truth is in the garden. No name, no signature. Hastings leaned forward. What did you think? Poirot gave a dry smile. At first, that someone had a flair for the dramatic, but I do not care for drama when paired with murder. I pocketed the note and went to the garden. He described the Cavendish garden, a walled enclosure behind the house, narrow gravel paths winding between flower beds, rose bushes, now bare in the winter cold. A line of hedges flanked a lonely bench, half hidden from view. And there, Poirot said, I found them. Hastings blinked. Who? Annie and Oliver, standing near the bench, close together, each holding a letter, same size, same paper. He mimicked his own voice from that moment. What brings you both out here? I asked, as though surprised. Annie answered calmly. We received notes, slipped under our doors. They said, the truth is in the garden. Oliver gave a quick nod, but didn't meet my eyes. Poirot turned back to Hastings. Do you see the problem? They were meant to be seen, Hastings said slowly. Precisely, Poirot replied. Whether the letters came from the same source or not, the outcome was calculated. I was meant to find them here, together, searching. But searching for what? And did you find anything? Hastings asked. We dug, Poirot said. Beneath the hedge, Laura fetched a spade. An officer joined. We turned the earth gently, and eventually we unearthed it. Hastings sat forward. What was it? A wooden box, about the size of a large book. No markings, no lock. He paused. And empty. Completely? Hastings asked, incredulous. Not even dust. Clean, as though it had never held anything. Hastings frowned. So it was a decoy? Poirot nodded. Yes. But more than that, it was a performance. Someone wanted to manufacture the appearance of progress. You see, when a case moves, even falsely, it feels alive. But a clever mind will always ask, who benefits from that illusion? He stood and crossed slowly to the fireplace. The garden was an ideal stage for misdirection, open, visible, confined within walls. The letters, too perfectly timed, too precisely worded. It was all designed to pull attention away from the house. And the box? Hastings asked. Do you think it was always empty? Poirot turned, his gaze sharp. Perhaps, or perhaps what it once held had already been removed, but in either case, the emptiness was the message. A puzzle meant to frustrate, a deliberate distraction. He returned to his chair and lifted his coffee cup at last, sipping slowly. Murderers, Hastings, vary in their craft. Some rely on brute force, others on secrets, but the most dangerous of all rely on distraction. And in this case, Hastings asked, what was it meant to hide? Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes distant. That, he said, is what I intended to uncover next. Chapter 6. The witness that spoke no words. Poirot's gaze steadied on Hastings, his tone hushed but firm. We had searched the house, interviewed each soul within it, dug up the garden on the basis of a lie. Yet all along, the truest witness had been watching, silent, unnoticed, behind a cage of brass. Hastings raised an eyebrow. You mean the parrot? Oui, mon ami, the parrot, Poirot said, a creature with no motive, no agenda, and no fear of consequence. It had seen the murder, it had heard the killer's voice, and, this is the important part, it remembered. He leaned in slightly, hands clasped together. I recalled a case from years ago, a parrot that not only repeated words but understood when and how to speak them. These birds don't just mimic, They absorb, they observe. Madame Cavendish adored hers. She spoke to it constantly. It would have known her voice well, and it would have noticed a change in tone or the approach of someone trusted or feared. Poirot rose, pacing slowly across the rug. I returned to the drawing room where the parrot was kept. It sat on its perch, feathers fluffed, motionless. Since the murder, it had made no sound, not a word, not even a chirp. He stopped in front of the window, his back to Hastings. I decided to test a theory. No tools, no technology, only a little psychology. He turned, eyes sharp with memory. I took a blank sheet of paper and tore it into 3 strips. On each, I wrote a single letter. O for Oliver, A for Annie, L for Laura. All identical in style, plain block letters, no scent, no embellishment. I placed the strips before the cage. Poirot's eyes glinted. And then I waited. Hastings leaned forward. And? At first, nothing, Poirot said. The bird glanced at each slip one by one, and then, quite calmly, it reached out and picked up the one marked O. Oliver, Hastings murmured. Exactly, I repeated the test. 3 times, different arrangements, new handwriting, each time the same result. Oh, remarkable, Hastings said. Poirot nodded. It is not conclusive evidence, but it was confirmation of what I already suspected. He turned toward the fire, speaking more slowly now. The nature of the wound, it had always troubled me. The knife had pierced the sternum cleanly, directly to the heart. That requires control and force. Annie, though composed, was fragile. Laura, young and earnest, had no capacity for violence, but Oliver, he paused meaningfully. Oliver was desperate. His factory was failing. He had borrowed heavily, using his aunt's name. And when she refused to fund his recovery, when she threatened to revoke his inheritance, he made his choice. Hastings nodded grimly. And the parrot saw it happen. And heard it, Poirot said. Perhaps even tried to mimic something it heard, a name, a shout, a final word, but no one paid it any mind, except me. Hastings tilted his head. What did you do next? I went straight to Oliver, Poirot said, his tone tightening. He was in the study, pretending to read. I asked Annie and Laura to join us. He recalled the moment vividly. I have made progress, I said. And now I must speak plainly. The parrot in the drawing room witnessed the murder, and during 3 separate tests, it identified Oliver as the figure it remembers most vividly from that night. Poirot gave a thin smile. His reaction was subtle, but telling. His eyes flicked toward the door. One hand twitched on the armrest. That's absurd, he said. It's just a bird. Exactly, I replied. A bird that cannot lie, a bird that sat with your aunt every day and watched as you took her life. And now it remembers. He opened his mouth to object, but I raised a hand. I had my doubts, yes. The strength of the attack excluded Annie and Laura. The staged letters and the buried box. A theatrical distraction, your feigned ignorance about the textile industry, also a lie, and now we have the bird's testimony. You've got no proof, he shouted. Not yet, I said. But I suspect we'll find debts, forged documents, a paper trail leading back to your name. The police will see to it. And in the meantime, your story is crumbling. Hastings let out a low whistle. Did he confess? Not immediately, Poirot said. But the unraveling came quickly. The police, once alerted, found forged papers hidden in his room, documents linking his factory's debts to Madame Cavendish's finances. He paused. The parrot could not speak the truth aloud, but it pointed us toward it. Chapter 7. Truth in Silence. The room was still. Oliver sat with his head bowed, fingers tightly interlaced, as if trying to physically hold himself together. The force of Poirot's deductions, the quiet inevitability of the evidence, and the silent, unblinking presence of the parrot had finally broken through. At last, he spoke. I asked her for money, he said, voice thin and cracking. She refused, told me she'd already done too much, that I was reckless, that I didn't deserve another chance. She said she was going to change her will. He faltered, eyes fixed on the floor. I'd lost control. I didn't plan it. The knife was already in the desk drawer. I just snapped. I wasn't thinking. I only wanted her to stop judging me. The factory was failing, and it was all I had. Poirot stood in silence, expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside as Chief Inspector Barrow, waiting in the hallway, entered with 2 uniformed constables. "Mr. Oliver Cavendish," the inspector said, his voice clipped and clear, "you are under arrest for the murder of Margaret Cavendish." Oliver stood, slow and heavy. There was no protest, no attempt at denial. He looked smaller now, his pride gone, his posture slouched under the weight of truth. As the officers led him away, he glanced back once, toward the drawing room. The parrot sat in its cage by the window. Still. Quiet. Watching. It tilted its head slightly, blinking once, impervious to the moment unfolding before it. Poirot and Hastings remained behind, the house now unnaturally quiet, as though exhaling after days of tension. Poirot turned to his companion, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You see, Hastings," he said gently. In the end, it was not a fingerprint, a footprint, or a glove carelessly dropped that solved the case. It was the presence of a bird. Hastings raised a skeptical eyebrow. "So your famous little grey cells were outwitted by a parrot?" Poirot gave a soft laugh. "Ah, non. The grey cells simply needed a reminder, a nudge in the right direction." They walked slowly into the drawing room. The cage still sat by the window, bathed in soft morning light. The parrot now preened its wing, completely untroubled. No one else could get Oliver to speak, Poirot said, but this small creature, without saying a word, revealed the truth. It saw, it remembered, and in its silence, it made him face what he had done. Hastings looked at the bird with quiet wonder. "Well," he said, "I suppose it's lucky for you the parrot didn't take up detective work." Poirot smiled. "Indeed, mon ami, I fear I might have been forced into retirement." Epilogue. The quietest clue. Weeks had passed since the case had closed. The newspapers had run their headlines. Nephew confesses to heiress murder. Detective Poirot cracks the case with help from a bird. Most read it as a novelty. A murder solved not by evidence in the traditional sense, but by a silent witness with feathers and bright eyes. But in Poirot's mind, the case was never about the bird alone. It was about the spaces between words, the pauses, the contradictions people didn't mean to give, the silence that stretched too long or came too soon. Madame Cavendish had lived in a world of routines, her tea at 4, her parrot fed with care, her letters neatly arranged, a world that was methodical, ordered, that someone had thought to shatter that world with violence and then use silence as a shield was what disturbed Poirot most. But in the end, the truth had refused to stay buried. In a brass cage by a window, a creature without words had held onto a memory. It had not screamed, it had not squawked out names or reenacted the crime, it had simply remembered. And when the moment came, it had pointed, quietly, instinctively, without malice, toward guilt. Now, as Poirot stood once again in the Cavendish drawing room, he looked at the parrot, who blinked back at him with calm indifference. "You, mon petit témoin," he said softly, "were the only one who never tried to lie." He gave a small, respectful bow. Then, turning toward the door, he added, almost to himself, "Sometimes the most truthful voices are the ones that say nothing at all." And with that, he left the house, leaving behind only the faint echo of footsteps and a bird, still watching.